I just think we need I think we just need to have a bus ball. Yeah, it's Ray is what we're wrong. Yeah.
Something like task force or subcommittee. One is policies, one is research and science, and the other is it's actually the partnership itself.
So I was just saying to Hope that when I was having a chat with Rick yesterday, he just mentioned that he was a bit unclear around membership within the task force versus how it relates to the working group itself.
Because I think the way we have to spell that out, and we didn't reactivate it. So it was a good observation, and something that we have to
Yeah, and to what extent this working group what happens particularly when you have partnerships that are looking to
my fear is this one, might include 1,000.
yeah.
So we didn't want all of them to be here.
Yeah.
So we want to keep this more as a steering committee and advisory, the group that shapes the overall process.
But we might need some kind of plenary.
Yep, once a year or something.
Individuals and organizations might not be actually in these day-to-day activities, but for sure I'm not interested in this more systematically, but they want to be involved in the research.
And so how is this steering, but then who's the overall person in charge?
Whoever is the chair.
So in terms of human resources, etc.
That's part of the problem. I you finance it? How do you fund it? How does that happen? Currently, I've been sharing just out of my own money. I suspect we'll continue to operate that way unless we get a foundation or someone that gives them. What Hilton has given us about $250K buildings. Then we'll start getting grants and other foundation resources, which I hope will be able to fund all these other programs. Yeah, Hilton will give the money to IAPMO, who's going to take us.
Okay, so that's what I have my okay, but those were two kind of
I think it's all coming. That's my understanding. I do think this is something. Might as well get started. Where did Sid go? Did you see Sid? We good to go?
It becomes a.
I see. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday at the UNC Water and Health Conference, and you'll get a better welcome, I think, during the plenary, but good morning. I'm glad everybody showed up early at 8:30, and I'm really excited about today's event talking about lead. How many people were with us on Monday at the workshop? I just want to get a show of hands. All right, so not quite half, but about half. Okay. All right, so that gives us, so then I think we're okay. I apologize to some of you Monday. You're going to hear some of the same stuff today. But then hopefully we're going to quickly go into some of the new materials around the partnership and things like that as we get going. So hopefully there's enough here for everyone and to keep everyone excited and in their seats. I do first want to thank Sid Roy. He's actually walking around handing out agendas right now. He really is the architect behind this event and putting it all together. So thank you, Sid, for doing all that. And maybe we'll just go right into it. Again, some of you have heard this story, but some of you haven't. So I'll just lay it out, and we'll use this as the starting point. So in 2019, UNC conducted what has now probably still stands as one of the largest surveys of drinking water quality and rural drinking water systems throughout sub-Saharan Africa and into South America and Asia. One of the things that we found was that 80% of the systems that we looked at had lead contamination. About 8-9% of those systems had levels of lead contamination that were above WHO standards and guidelines. And that's about 10 times what we have here in the United States. And so what we found was, I won't use the word, where's Ray? Oh, I gotta find Ray, there we go, thank you. What we found was widespread contamination of lead in these drinking water systems, almost everywhere. And one of the things that we'll talk a little bit about in a minute is that lead is sorry, I won't use that word either. Lead is a very serious threat to human health risk. There is no safe level of lead exposure. And when people are exposed to lead, the impacts that it has on their future development, their future economic potential is profound. And so this is a very serious problem that we saw throughout the world. One of the other things that we learned when we did this study was that the source of lead in these in these systems was not the water itself, but it was the components and parts used to construct those systems. And so that this source of lead contamination was wholly preventable by using parts and components that didn't leach lead into the water. And so it's something that we could prevent by taking the right actions up front when we're just starting and working on these systems. And so we took this on as a challenge, as a very important part of our trying to improve drinking water quality worldwide. We understand there's still a whole range of microbial chemical threats to drinking water quality. However, toxic metals, lead is one of them, toxic metals is becoming an increasing component of those threats to our health and safety from drinking water. And how we begin to address those risks and threats from toxic metals is becoming a more important part of how we deal with addressing water quality and improving water quality globally. So what we did is we decided, because we knew that a lot of the lead that was coming into these systems was because of actions that we ourselves were taking, we decided to launch a global partnership to try to catalyze political action to address this new risk around drinking water. And what we did is we went to the UN, we hosted a major event with support from a number of major governments. I'd like to thank Uganda, Ghana, South Africa, who really helped champion this issue up at the UN. And in March in 2023, we had a high-level event where we launched a new global commitment to eliminate the use of lead-leaching parts and components in drinking and the construction of new water supply systems by 2030. And that's our goal. It's a simple one-sentence goal. By 2030, eliminate the use of lead-leaching parts and components in the construction of new water supply systems. And that's what we're after. And that's what this partnership and our political objective is over the coming couple of years. And so what you're going to hear about today is a little bit about this partnership. The partnership itself is this global leadfreewater.org. That's where you can find information and knowledge about the partnership and a resource tool. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that partnership can provide, what all of your roles can be, and what it can do to help support you in developing your own plans and strategies in addressing lead contamination in water. But what we thought we'd first start with is a little bit of a conversation around the challenge of lead in drinking water. And I'd like to call up two people. Batsy Majuru, she's a technical officer at the World Health Organization, and Jorge Alvarez Sala, the WASH specialist at UNICEF. And if you guys could come up and join us up here. Maybe what we'll start is on a conversation around lead in drinking water and how that impacts human health, and get everybody on the same, wherever's fine. Okay, great. And Batsy, maybe we'll start with you, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about this challenge of lead. What does lead mean, and how does it impact global health, and where do you see it as being a major problem?
Sure, I think I should have some slides.
Do you have slides? Is that true, Sid? Okay.
Take you to them.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As I've already been introduced, I'm Batsy Majuru. I'm with the WASH unit at the WHO headquarters in Geneva. I just wanted to set the scene today by just talking a little bit about the health impacts of lead, and then my colleague Jorge will talk about the extent of lead exposure. I think the first point that I want to highlight, and that has already been highlighted by Aaron, is just how significant lead is as a chemical on public health. It affects nearly every system of the human body. That includes your kidneys, your brain, etc. So it has very strong cardiovascular and neurological effects. Pregnant women and children are particularly vulnerable to lead exposure. And so the key factor highlight here is that there is no safe level of lead exposure. There's no threshold at which we can say, oh, if you're at this point, then you should be okay. Thinking now about the impacts of lead exposure, what we know is that of the 200 million deaths that are due to known chemical exposure, almost half of those are attributed to lead. And we also know that beyond deaths from lead exposure, it also has serious impacts on development. So it has a huge global burden related to developmental and intellectual disability. So we know that 30% of that global burden is due to lead exposure. The map that's shown on the figure is just highlighting the extent to which children are exposed to lead. So it highlights blood lead levels that are above 5 micrograms per deciliter, which is the threshold at which WHO recommends that action has to be taken to identify the sources of that lead exposure and to mitigate them. So what the map is highlighting is that a lot of that exposure is disproportionately high in low and middle income countries. But again, this is a global issue. It's not just low and middle income countries that are dealing with lead right now. I think many of us are familiar with lead issues in the United States. Lead is also being found in some countries in Europe. So the key point is that it's not just something that is happening in low and middle income countries, but it's happening everywhere around the world. And that's why it's very important to be taking action on it. So with this background, WHO has identified 10 chemicals that are of significant concern that require priority action by its 194 member states. And it actually recommends that all countries, all these member states, take action to reduce exposure to these chemicals. And of course, lead is one of them. I think I highlighted on Monday when we had our workshop on this session that actually these discussions that we're having now on lead are very timely, because this week is the week on lead poisoning prevention. And so it's timely that we are talking about it and having these discussions around how we can all be not just taking action to mitigate, but more importantly, how do we prevent this exposure to lead? The last point that I will highlight is that WHO recognizes the importance of controlling lead, managing lead in drinking water. And lead has always been included as a chemical that needs to be, for which standards need to be set by countries. So it's always been included in its guidelines for drinking water quality. And so in these guidelines, they highlight that standards should be set that are appropriate for the setting, and where resources permit, efforts should be made to reduce as much as possible exposure to lead. So with that, I think I will stop here, and I will let Jorge talk a bit about the extent of exposure to lead.
Thank you, Betsy. Before I start, I would like to just clarify for those who were here on Monday in the sessions on lead in drinking water that this is not a repeat session from what you heard on Monday, but we thought that being conscious that some people might be new to this topic, it was important to re-emphasize why we are here today and why we believe that lead in drinking water is something that needs to be taken into account. So before I start, I would like to clarify that there is still a lot of uncertainties around up to which extent lead in drinking water contributes to lead poisoning in children and in adults. There are several different sources of lead in the environment. One of them, for instance, is from painting, from air, etc. And until now, lead in drinking water has not been a big area of concern to those working on land prevention and mitigation. I would say until now. There is growing evidence that lead in drinking water is a problem that is most likely bigger than we all thought, is more widespread, is not something located in, in systems that had lead pipes, is something that comes in other contexts. Here we have, just some headlines. Obviously, when we're speaking about quality of drinking water is a very hot topic, is often quickly, politicized, is quickly, creating alarm in the population. So this is something that we have to keep in mind when we are thinking of lead prevention campaigns, etc. Many people here in this room is familiar with Flint, with cases here in the U.S. I don't remember, Aaron, if you mentioned this morning, but even here at UNC, that led the lead research in West Africa, tested pipes in the campus and found a high concentration of lead in many water points. But
your water here is okay.
And I'm drinking it. It's tap
yes.
water.
But as I previously said, and as Betsy said, lead is not just a problem in high-income countries with lead pipes. It has been found in many low and middle-income countries, in both rural and urban areas, in both high-income countries and low and middle-income countries. So it's, I would say, quite widespread. And I think at least for myself and for UNICEF, the piece of work that UNC had on West African countries in rural areas was eye-opening, because we realized that this is an area of important concern. And unlike bacteriological contamination, that continues to be our main area of concern in low and middle income countries, this is something that those organizations, governments, UN agencies, NGOs, this is something that we put in the system. It's not something that is, in some cases is geogenic, but in many cases is something that is in the materials that we bring and that we install. So that represents to me a reputational risk, and represents a reputational risk not to those installing, it's a reputational risk for the entire sector. So this is something that I think we need to pay attention. We will discuss later on around this. Just as a background, most lead in drinking water comes from leaching from lead-containing materials. As I said earlier, lead pipelines is the initial suspect, but we have found important concentrations of lead and lead leaching in materials such as brass components, but also in galvanized iron pipes, but also in other, I would say, less suspected materials such as PVC pipes. Even if the majority of national and international standards prevent lead to be included as a plastifier in PVC pipes, the reality is that including lead in pipes makes the manufacturing much cheaper, like 50% cheaper. So obviously in countries where there is not much quality control and quality assurance of materials, there is a big incentive by the industry to use these low quality, in this case PVC pipes, but also other types of materials that can, cut costs based by using lead. So I will stop here. I don't want to take much of your time, because the purpose of today's session is more to look at the next steps and the global action. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Jorge. Any quick questions around the health impacts of lead and what this really means for us in drinking water? Rachel. Yeah, use the mic because I think we are broadcast.
Yeah, thanks, Jorge. Thanks, Batsy. Thanks, Aaron. This has been great. Maybe this is a question for Batsy, although anyone's welcome to answer it. I would love just to hear a little bit more about lead in the context of other pollutants, in terms of, arsenic, fluoride. I know you have the 10, and also microbial contamination we talk a lot about, and what's kind of the relative burden of disease? Thank you.
I think that's an important question, and it's something that we're highlighting in the workshop on Monday, that we're not saying that lead is everywhere and in every country, in every system. So this is why, as part of our recommendations, we say that it has to be a risk-based approach that is taken to managing these contaminants, including lead. And so I don't have the figures at hand right now in terms of, okay, lead versus arsenic and what the global burden of disease is, but it's something that I'm happy to follow up on. Our recommendation is still that microbial contamination still remains a primary concern in a lot of countries, but where the lead is also a concern, then action needs to be taken. But again, this all centers around taking that risk-based approach.
Great. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, lead kills around 1 million people a year, but we don't know how many of these people dies as a consequence of lead in drinking water. That's the link that we haven't been able to establish yet. Obviously, 1 million people is obviously an area of big concern for those working in public health and in environmental health. The other point that I would like to re-emphasize is that, at least in low and middle income countries, bacteriological contamination continues to be the main area of concern. And in JMP, for instance, now that WHO and UNICEF is sitting on the table with the JMP, the JMP, as you know, has one indicator on bacteriological contamination and main chemical contamination, which includes fluoride and arsenic, not lead. We don't expect to include lead as part of the indicator, the global indicator for water quality, not at the moment. But again, this might change in the future. This is to me, an area that we are all learning, and that I think the more we investigate and we find on one side, the scope of the problem in the sector, and on the other side, the link up to which extent lead in drinking water contributes to this burden of disease, I think the importance of lead might most likely increase from now.
Perfect. And that's a great segue to our next session. Thank you, Jorge and Batsy. Thank you. Yeah, in fact, Rachel, it was a great question. And that's one of the reasons why we developed this partnership. There are 4 things that we're trying to do through this partnership. One of which is around policy and advocacy. Can we begin to build political will, bring attention to the issue, and get global leaders to begin to focus on the fact that the way they do their work in country is contributing a major source of creating a major health risk in drinking water for many of their own people. This is something we wanted to bring attention to. And so one key element of our partnership is around this policy and advocacy. A second key element of our partnership is exactly what Rachel mentioned. There are still a lot of science questions that are unanswered around lead exposure, particularly what's the role of lead exposure through drinking water compared to all the other sources of lead that exist within our environment that could be impacting children. And so we need to figure that out. And we need to do a better job correlating what drinking water exposures are to blood lead levels, what type of remediation efforts work and how they work. This is still a lot of science that needs to be done. That's another key part of this partnership. And in fact, the partners who have worked through what we call this informal working group on toxic metals have developed a research strategy where we've defined very specific areas of research that we want to carry out so that we can better understand the scope and the importance of lead exposure in drinking water. The third component that this partnership is trying to do is to build capacity. In other words, how can we help support partners across the world, whether they're national governments, whether they're development partners, whether they are academic institutes, whoever it is, how can we help them better understand the challenges, understand how to measure, monitor, address lead in their own drinking water? How do we begin to create a knowledge platform that can help build capacity globally around this type of an issue? And that's the third thing that we're trying to do through this partnership. And then the fourth thing that we're trying to do is provide direct support to partners who really want to do this. Can we work side by side with development partners, with national governments, with other entities that are trying to address lead challenges in their own drinking water and provide them the support they need to develop those plans and strategies and implement those plans and strategies to both prevent and remediate lead in drinking water systems? That's what our partnership is about. And so what we're going to do is we're going to move to our next panel. We're going to talk a little bit more about the actual actions that we're recommending under this partnership. And I think those of you, Mike, I'm going to take yours for a second. Sorry about that. But if you, in all of your books, you'll see there's a full page copy of the lead pledge. I know I can find it somewhere in here. Page 46. Oh, thank you. Yeah, right. So it's actually, you can actually see the entire lead pledge in your programs. And it states our overall goal, overall purpose, what political commitment that we're looking for. And again, that's to eradicate the use of lead leaching parts and components in the construction of new drinking water supply systems by 2030. And it talks about some specific areas of action. So what we're going to do is we're going to call up some representatives of different groups to talk about these areas of action and what it is that we're proposing that we can do through this partnership. That's okay, I got it. No worries. So what I'd like to do is call up Christopher Lindsay. He's the Vice President of Government Relations at IAPMO. Ray Norman, Global Director for Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene at World Vision International. And Mike Fisher, Assistant Professor here at UNC in the Department of Environmental Sciences and Engineering. And maybe, Christopher, I'll start with you. What are some of the actions that national governments can take, or we as a global community can take, to address this lead challenge?
Perfect. Well, first off, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to talk about these important issues. For those who aren't familiar, IAPMO is a 100-year-old trade association that's been an important voice in the plumbing and water and sanitation sector. So we work very closely with both regulators, with government officials, with the manufacturers, anyone involved with kind of design, maintenance, and installation of systems in our sector. Our mission is to promote kind of strong local and international industry. So with that said, that's kind of the lens, how we're approaching, this issue. And I'm wondering, Aaron, if you could forward up, I think I have one slide that I want to point to.
Okay, this way?
Let's see, they go one more. I just want to highlight a couple things on this slide. First off, so IAPMO participated with a number of other organizations to do a regulatory landscape. We looked at the laws and regulations governing our sector across countries in Asia and in some parts of Africa. And you can see some of the preliminary findings. We looked at laws and regulations, particularly as they related to products, looking at fittings and fixtures that are used in our sector, looking at water filtration technologies, and also looking at piping. And then we did a deeper dive to figure out which one of those national technical regulations, which are actually mandatory versus voluntary, just on the books. And these are the kind of the preliminary data from those two studies. What we find is that, ideally, you would see columns, all three columns, well populated for each country, and then the fourth column, actually all four columns would be well populated. However, you can see that there's gaps. And the key findings from these studies found that largely in LMICs, the water and sanitation sector for products is largely unregulated, which does impact kind of the costs that Jorge was mentioning. It makes it difficult to find quality products that are safe and products that address material safety, performance, efficiency, and so forth. So the other key findings are it means that we continue to build new systems today that have lead contaminated and lead leaching materials as components. So we're continuing to exacerbate this problem in many countries. And so for us, the easy first step when it comes to tackling lead in drinking water is just to stop the flow of lead leaching components in new systems. And that's primarily what we're driving towards. And there's a number of other benefits that economies derive when they take those steps. There's other contaminants that are being introduced by unsafe products. And so for us, this is just the easy first steps. In my remarks, I want to highlight the role of two stakeholder groups that we're particularly working with. First are manufacturers. We're asking manufacturers and those who are joining in on this partnership are committing to a number of actions. A couple that I just want to highlight is one, that they're working to identify lead leaching components across their product lines and their supply chains. Two, they're committing to manufacture products that meet international best practices or international standards for lead leaching and lead content, and we're excited about those new commitments. And then three is that they're committing to work with governments in the formalization and kind of the regulation of their sector in these countries and being a partner in that process. For the other stakeholder that we wanted to highlight and working very closely with are governments themselves. And again, we're not asking countries to take the entire leap in one bound. There's steps that they can take, incremental steps. Just to kind of give you the lay of the land, countries usually approach lead in regulations through two ways. One is by addressing lead content in products, and the other is by addressing lead leaching in these products. From lead content, we've gone, in my lifetime, from 8% requirements, well, no requirements, to 8% requirements of allowable lead in a product to now kind of the international best practice is 0.25% of wetted surface where lead is allowed. For lead leaching, some of the current requirements are 10 parts per billion is the water quality directive set out by the WHO. Europe in its products has gone to, and US have largely gone to 5 parts per billion. However, in the last year, California is changing the US market because they've now moved to go to 1 part per billion or non-detect level requirement for their water and sanitation products. Now again, I don't want to emphasize you don't have to, if we don't saying that markets have to make that leap in one bound. No economy has. But the good news is there's many countries that are on this journey, and they're at different points of this journey. And if your country is not on that path yet, that's the number one thing we would encourage you to do, is to get on that path. And as an international industry, we're happy to work with you to and with your local industry to identify what are the targets that make sense for your economy and your market, and so that we can begin to address this problem. For us, what does the future look like? We are developing a roadmap that will kind of spell out a number of these industry processes and steps that governments can take to standardize and kind of formalize their plumbing markets and for all water and sanitation products. And we need your voice. So come help us be a part of this process by joining the partnership, helping us to identify where are the gaps in the products that you're using, where the hurdles, where are the opportunities, and we'd love to have your expertise be included in this. So with that, I'll yield the mic back.
Thanks, Christopher. And I just want to put a fine point on this, right? If we're looking to prevent this type of exposure, regulating the metals that go into the components that make up these systems is probably the most important and critical step that we can take. And so it's often something we don't talk about in our WASH community, which is the value of regulations and standards, critically important in this particular case. Enforcement of regulation and standards, critically important in this particular case. We have a couple of tank parts that we have upstairs that we tested, and these were parts that were certified lead-free, that had 1% lead in them, and were leaching lead well over WHO standards into the drinking water. And
I always have to point out they were self-certified.
Sorry, self-certified, right? Self-certified parts. And so even making sure we've got these supply chain problems addressed and done in the right way, a critically important part of what we're trying to do. So thank you, Christopher. And I'll give you time for questions once we go through all three. The question's a little bit different for you, Ray. So Ray, World Vision, one of the largest development partners in the world around drinking water and sanitation. And this represents a significant challenge for development partners who are installing systems worldwide that might have some of these challenges. Ray, what are some of the steps that the development partners might be able to take to address these challenges?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Aaron. Aaron, I've got a few slides, if you could step me through those.
Next deck, those are mine.
That's yours? Is he after you?
Yes, he's got you.
All right, good. Yeah, so as Aaron said, World Vision is one of the larger NGO providers of clean water around the world in LMICs. We work in 40 plus countries in Latin America, Asia, Africa, Middle East, etc. So I just wanted to give you, from our standpoint, an example of what we've done, provide you a 30,000-foot view of our journey of addressing the issue of lead in drinking water. So next, yeah, just go ahead and pull up the bullets there. There's 3 of them. So as part of a larger 14-country evaluation that we did for our global WASH program, and this was implemented by the Water Institute back in the 2017-18 period. As part of that, the Water Institute took a deeper dive into looking at issues of water quality. And when they did this study, this was not just with World Vision systems. These were systems that across the sector of the countries they were in, looking at World Vision implemented systems, government implemented systems, and systems implemented by other stakeholders across each country. When the data came out, the data was particularly strong in 3 countries, in Ghana, Mali, and Niger, and some of you may be familiar with Mike's published paper on the results of that study. But as you've already heard, I think it's already been quoted here, about 9% of samples in these 3 countries exceeded the WHO guidelines. And I'm going to come back to Ghana in a minute. Ghana itself had about 6%. With component testing, 82% of systems had lead above 0.25% weight. And we also learned at that stage that lead seemed to be associated with brass parts. We've since learned that we have issues with galvanized materials as well. So what did we do? As an NGO who had funded this study, and we have these results, you know, what was our response? The first thing we did, the first thing we did was to engage the national governments. We, as World Vision, always feel we work in partnership with national governments and for the 40-plus countries where we're doing WASH, and we feel strongly that governments must take leadership. We can't lead. We're there to support and contribute and help, but governments really need to take leadership. So we engaged government entities. We had a meeting with the ministries of water from these 3 countries. We convened a meeting. We shared the results. We discussed them. They developed action plans. And of course, we also engaged other stakeholders in the WASH community across these 3 countries. And then we began holding national workshops to train, to better inform and to begin training our own staff as well as other stakeholders in those countries which were invited. We also had the opportunity to share those results and our planned action at the RegNet meeting. Batsy helped facilitate that for us at WHO in 2019. That was an excellent meeting. I was surprised at how well the information was received, but it was a good opportunity to get the word out of the challenges that we're facing. Then internally, we took some major actions. The first thing we did internally was we completely revised and updated our supply chain and procurement guidelines. And this was very important. So we took several months to revise and update those, and we developed 2 different documents. One, an internal document for our staff who are going to be ordering supplies. Secondly, a document for our suppliers that we always provide to all of our suppliers now so that they would understand what our goals are. We also updated our water quality testing protocols as well. So those were 2 major internal actions, and that had to be followed up with a lot of in-person training. We traveled to regional and national offices to update our staff, not just our WASH staff, but our supply chain staff, even our auditors. Next slide, please. And you can fill, we've got 3 or 4 bullets there. Okay. So further actions that we did, we took. By that time, this informal lead working group had come together, and we were invited by the WHO, by Jennifer and others, Jennifer DeFrance, to assist in developing the technical brief on lead in drinking water, and that was, published in 2021. I think, did we launch that here, or was it here? What meeting were we at when that was launched? The technical brief.
I thought it was here.
I think it was here.
Yeah.
It was here.
UNC leads the way.
Yeah.
I think it was here last
Then the next step we did, we realized that the information we have, while it indicated that there was a problem, the data we had didn't really tell us all the details of the issue. So World Vision decided to fund an in-depth study in Ghana in partnership with the Water Institute. That study is presently ongoing, and in very close collaboration with the government of Ghana. And of course, the goal there is to take a deeper look at the problem, with the hope of developing preventative and corrective measures going forward. We then, in Ghana, but also in the other countries where we work, we begin building local capacities on lead issues, and that is very much ongoing. And the last thing I'd mention is we engaged in third-party verification of materials using the XRF, X-ray fluorescence. It's a handheld device within country partners for products that were delivered to check their compliance. And we found that, surprisingly, materials we were getting that were supposed to be lead-free from our suppliers, in fact, were not lead-free. So, as an NGO, we started sending parts back. And that really starts sending ripples among suppliers. You know, when they supply lead-free materials, and we say, well, wait a minute, we just tested this, and there's an issue here. So that, you know, I think that is sending a very good message among suppliers to know that we are actually doing third-party testing when materials arrive. And we've been able to get acceptable parts, and at this point, to my surprise, that only represents about a 2% increase in our cost. We hope it stays there. It may eventually go up, but for now, the increase in cost has not been as significant as we thought. I'll stop there. Just a few examples of what we've done.
No, Ray, that's great. And it should give folks a flavor of what the development partners, the implementers in the room can do in the field to help address some of these challenges. And again, this idea that you can verify whether or not you've got lead in the components in the field with this handheld XRF device or other methods, we can talk a little bit about that, and put pressure back on your manufacturers and say, hey, look, we measured this. It wasn't what you promised to deliver. Important thing in terms of getting change happening within our manufacturers, in addition to the work that Christopher's suggesting as well. So we now have kind of a third group of partners, and these are not the development partners who are building the systems out in the field, not the governments or regulators who are involved in doing this, but it's the rest of us who might be part of the scientific community or NGOs on the outside. What is it that we can do to help support then addressing these types of challenges in country? Mike, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how we can do that, and do you want to come up and control, or you want me to do it?
Thanks, Aaron. I'll actually just drive the clicker from here. If it works.
Okay, I'm going to back you up to yours.
Well, to be determined. Wonderful. I think we're good. So thanks so much, Aaron. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to call out something really impactful, I think, that you know, we heard from World Vision and implicitly with respect to the countries that really took the lead on this, Ghana, Uganda, South Africa, and others, which is at the beginning when there was tremendous uncertainty about what we would find and the extent to which that would be preventable. You know, World Vision, Ghana, Uganda, South Africa, and others really stepped up to say, hey, let's go find out, get the best available evidence on occurrence, and we'll take it from there to do what needs to be done to solve the problem. And that was tremendously, I think, brave and impactful in terms of opening up space for others to follow along as we increasingly see from the evidence that this is very widespread. But it does raise the question of, well, how do we do the monitoring in each individual setting, in each individual implementation context to understand occurrence and take actions on prevention. And WHO has given us wonderful guidance on this in the technical brief, but one of the things that we note is almost every action in the sequence suggested by WHO really depends on fit-for-purpose monitoring data. And so ideally, we would like fit-for-purpose monitoring data on lead content in the parts that are being installed in our systems. And we'd really like that data before they're installed and before they're in the ground. And that poses some challenges, both because lead-containing parts and lead-free parts can look identical, and because, as we heard from the World Vision experience, sometimes the manufacturers themselves don't know the precise lead content of their parts. For example, pump manufacturers are going to be sourcing you know, their raw materials, their pipes, their sheet metal from global supply chains, and they may not be running third-party testing. And so there's a real need to set up verifiable, traceable third-party testing to find out, hey, this galvanized steel or this stainless steel part is lead-free. This brass part that was promised lead-free actually contains 3, 5, 8% lead. And World Vision's really led the way, showing that XRF can do this. Laboratories around the world have the capability to do non-destructive XRF testing or to grind off a little bit destructively and test it by other means. But in a lot of cases, the systems to routinely do that before parts are installed still need to be stood up. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity for those who are already doing this to share wisdom, experience, and learning about how to get third-party verification so that you can send back parts that are full of lead when they were promised to be lead-free. There's also challenge and opportunity. And actually, I want to back up and say the good news is because the evidence suggests that so much of this lead contamination is water system derived. As IAPMO mentioned, if we can stop the flow of lead parts into new systems, we can dramatically prevent lead occurrence through primary prevention. But separately, we'd really like to do water quality testing to track the extent to which that's working. And that can be a challenge because water is heterogeneous in nature, right? If I go to Jordan Lake down the street and test a liter of water today and a liter of water tomorrow, I'm going to get very different concentrations of a lot of different parameters. And lead is particularly tricky because it doesn't leach at a constant rate. So we get leaching of dissolved lead and introduction of particulate lead, and that's a noisy process, right? We call that stochastic. And so if I take 2 samples from the exact same system Monday and Tuesday, I may get 2 very different values. And that's important because it means that a single non-detect in a single water sample doesn't mean that this system is necessarily safe with respect to lead. And so that raises some challenges for individual systems, but the good news is that for a population of systems, I can get a good sense of, hey, are we reducing lead in water as we're stopping the flow of leaded parts into our systems? Are things better now than they were 5 years ago? And this is just an example from the literature of just how noisy and stochastic the introduction of dissolved and particulate lead from the same system into the water can be. And the reason that it's important to sort of say, hey, we can test every tap and every spout and have high confidence that that tap or spout is lead-free, but a one-off water test from that system won't necessarily give us perfect information. Rather, we want to have monitoring systems that can tell us, hey, across our population of systems, are we moving the needle on lead in water? And this can be a little challenging. I think Dr. Salzberg mentioned that World Vision partnered with us on one of the largest campaigns to get high-quality water data. In 14 countries, we looked for toxic metals in water from 10 countries. We got usable data back from the labs in 3 of those countries. And interestingly, in all 10 countries, we had identified laboratories with the instrumentation capable of detecting lead at part per billion levels. But what we found was that in many of those laboratories, the proper calibrations weren't being run, the proper standards weren't being used, the methods weren't necessarily suitable. And so in a lot of cases, the expensive instruments were there, they were being run, but there was an opportunity to build capacity to be able to tell the difference between 10 parts per billion lead, 5, 1, or non-detect. And so the good news is, in a lot of cases, the hardware is there, but the challenge is how can we, again, come together as a community of practice to build up the capacity so that countries and implementers can rely on that hardware to get the data that they need. And I'll go quickly, but I mean, I'm a nerd, so I love to talk about quality assurance, quality control, but that is sort of one of the trickiest things, but also the least costly things we can do to go from data that are unusable to data that are fit for purpose to take action. And then there's big opportunities for interpretation, dissemination, and translation. If those data sit on a spreadsheet, on a hard drive somewhere, they don't lead to action that benefits anyone. And so there's also opportunities for implementers in countries to build capacity to take the data on lead in parts and lead in water, translate it into action to solve the problem, as some of our early partners are doing. We're short on time, so I'll just say it's very helpful when standing up a lead monitoring and surveillance system to think about what are the objectives. Do we want to know about every system, or do we want to know what's going on with a population of systems over time? Which agencies and personnel are going to be collecting the samples, who's going to be analyzing them, whether it's our own people or a third-party laboratory, and how are the results and the data going to flow to enable decision makers to take action on the problem. Instrumentation and methods, it's not rocket science, but there is an opportunity, again, to strengthen the system so that we get the right sampling methods, the right reagents, standards, calibrations, so that decision makers can trust the results that they're getting. I'm going to go through this quickly, but again, this can be really helpful to organize prevention and track progress to see the extent to which we're reducing lead in water, and to have that third-party verification for parts so that, again, we have the opportunities to send back things that are unsafe before they're installed in the ground when it's much more difficult and costly. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Lots of opportunities, but again, it's incumbent on us, I think, to really verify the capacity of laboratories to detect these things, because often, again, the laboratories themselves may believe that their methods give a detection limit that's fit for purpose, but until we verify that, again, with standards, with blanks, with duplicates, with documented calibrations, 7 out of 10 times we find that the data aren't fit for purpose until a little bit of capacity building happens. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. And
Great.
the clicker's done as well.
Thanks, Mike. And so hopefully what you can see from here is, look, there's a huge need for capacity building at multiple levels to be able to make this work. Whether it's at the policy level and developing regulations and standards, whether it's in the field and with field staff on how they conduct their operations, whether it's in the laboratories to ensure that they can actually appropriately measure and provide the results that decision makers need to do things. So this is it's a complicated space. And again, that's the whole goal behind this partnership. I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions. I'm going to start with maybe one quick one. One thing we didn't talk about, but is also an area of research underneath this partnership, is low-cost ways of looking for lead. I think that's an important measure. I don't know, Mike, if you want to say something very quickly about the need for low-cost technologies to be able to identify lead contamination.
Yeah, I'd say there's tremendous opportunity in the space. Right now, the actual cost of running a sample on laboratory equipment represents a small fraction of the total cost, right? You need the trained personnel, you need the fuel, you need the staff time, and the instrumentation time. And so oftentimes we see the cost of water quality testing for these toxic metals can be high, especially if we want to sample every system. XRF, cost per test is tremendously low, but your capital outlay for a handheld XRF instrument for the field, often $20,000 to $40,000 US dollars. And so again, if a single implementer is going to purchase that and it's not in the budget, that's non-trivial. And so there's opportunities, I think, to capture economies of scale as this kind of monitoring becomes the norm and costs are shared among multiple partners and implementers in a country. But there's also, I think, the space for fit-for-purpose, low-cost field expedient methods that any field enumerator can be trained to use. And so there's tremendous interest in the research agenda Dr. Salzberg mentioned in terms of developing, adapting, and validating low-cost methods that can be used in the field to give a quick sense of, do we have a problem here, and is more intensive follow-up testing needed? And the caveat is, of course, a laboratory is going to provide traceable data that can be passed on to decision makers and they can have absolute confidence. Field level methods, whether they're quantitative or qualitative, are always going to be important as an adjunct to traceable laboratory testing, but they can be a tremendously cost-effective way to quickly convince decision makers to prioritize standing up the capability needed to get laboratory systems up and running, and to really prioritize preventive action to move the needle on the problem.
Questions from any of you? Go on over here. Sorry for reaching.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is David Cheche. I'm the Global Lead for Washington Catholic Relief Services. My question is to Chris. I like your statement of let's stop the flow, but I was just wondering whether from the study that you conducted, what was the reaction from the producers and suppliers of fittings and pipes with regards to taking on this challenge, and also with regards to institutions that are responsible for quality assurance and quality control in developing countries, and your experience in the US as well?
It's a great question. I mean, as an industry, it's a loaded question, right? Do we like regulations? The general answer is no, right? But we also recognize we have, particularly in international manufacturing, we have a duty to protect, human life and safety, and to develop, safe quality products. I mean, that's how products continue to sell in the long run, right? And so it is a little bit of a mixed bag. Our biggest challenge, I think, when we go into a market is to work with the local manufacturing and to help them realize what are the changes in the processes that they need to make to come up with, so let's say the international standard is 0.25% or of wetted surface. There may be some negotiation that has to take place of what would help to raise the baseline for quality products sold in that marketplace, and versus where the international standard currently is at. And usually we can find kind of a happy medium as we look at kind of what will make the most impact in that market. These things happen in steps. Our biggest challenge, I think, when it comes to dealing with regulators, with government, or with like national standards bodies, the ministries that have authority over regulation, is just the political will to start taking action on this. And I think that's one of the values of the partnership, is saying, hey, you don't have to start from scratch. There's all these resources that the partnership's bringing to bear and knowledge to help guide you in that decision making and walk you through that decision making tree. And so, when you ask about the other challenge we see is that when a lot of these countries, when you ask about oil and gas, they understand these processes very well. It's very well regulated. They already have very well protected supply chains. When you ask about textiles, same thing. But when we ask about water and sanitation systems, they toss up their hands and say, well, those are community solutions. So they understand, like, governments know how to do this. They just have not really applied it in the water and sanitation sector yet. And so part of, I think, with the lead issue is saying, hey, if we don't address this now, you're going to end up with a problem that the United States, Europe, and other advanced economies have, where they've stopped the flow of lead products, primarily, but now we have trillions of dollars of infrastructure that's leaching unsafe water. And so how do we, let's just stop it now as we're continuing to advance our own infrastructure. And so I think there's a compelling argument to be made there. And there's some great data that's coming out from the international community that's helping to make that case to manufacturers. But it's not an easy thing, and it's a dialogue.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a very wonderful session and topic. My question is, for the upcoming construction, for the upcoming intervention, that can be actually, that cannot be an issue because, we can decide what kind of materials we can use, but for the existing infrastructures, gonna be very difficult, especially in the low income setting. It's very difficult to, promote or advocate to replace the existing pipes and fittings. So lead treatment option, is it an option, treating lead in the water supply system from the outlet? Is that an option in the table for advocacy and policy?
Do you want to take that, or I'm happy to?
Corrosion control, other remediation methods. Mike?
Yeah, I'll start and then Chris jump in. So WHO did, I think, a very wise thing in their technical brief. First of all, they suggested a prevention-first approach. So whatever else we do, let's do primary prevention for new systems first. They're at the beginning of their system lifespan. Second thing, is they said, whatever else we do, don't stop the flow of water, right? Quantity, water in quantity that's microbially safe is indispensable for human health. It's a human right. Whatever else we do, let's keep that flowing. And so, with that as a starting point, I think that puts us in a good position to talk about, again, as WHO suggested, progressive remediation of existing systems. No country is in a position to overhaul its entire infrastructure immediately. And that's a non-starter. So, saying, hey, let's take action on primary prevention right now. Let's keep water flowing, and then let's get fit for purpose data to then say, how do we prioritize progressive remediation of existing systems where there's low-hanging fruit, corrosion control in pipe systems? That seems like a high impact, relatively low cost opportunity. Where we have decentralized systems, small and rural systems, we can think about progressively as there's updates and rehabilitation, can incriminated lead-containing parts be swapped out, and will that give us the impact that we need? There's an opportunity for research there. Filtration, there may be some role for it in some context, but again, more research is needed to see what works the best for progressive remediation of existing systems as sort of a second or third priority after primary prevention, low-hanging fruit, things like corrosion control in pipe systems. That's I think, some helpful guidance, although others may have counterpoints to that.
The only thing I'll add is that, one of the other things we're looking at is water filtration technologies. I mean, the filters, right? These are totally unregulated. Some people think, even in the United States, when we buy a filter, it's going to take out lead. It's one of those basic things. Let me tell you, that is not the case. There's, and that's something that we're working to address in the United States. In the United States, we have to make sure that your filter makes the claim to remove lead and is independently certified to do so. That's the only way to guarantee that you're getting the filter you think you are. And so even in the United States, when we've looked at the lead and copper rule, where filtration technologies is a intermediate step of saying, hey, it's going to be a lot of years before we replace this entire infrastructure. And in the interim, if you have unsafe water, that's, but again, we all know that's not it's not a silver bullet, but at least it's one way to get clean water now.
Sid, did you want to add to that at all?
No, I think.
Only because you're one of the. Okay, great. Any other, sorry, a couple other questions in the audience. And then what we're going to do is there are a number of other partners who are working with us in this globalwater.org partnership, and we're going to ask some of them to speak about what they're trying to accomplish through this partnership to give you a bigger flavor of what we're trying to do. And so we're going to turn it over to them. I'm actually going to turn the chair over to Sid at that point. So because we have a plenary session that I also need to, I need to make sure they're all doing what they need to do. So I'm going to step out for a few minutes, but I'm going to turn it over. We'll go through a couple of other questions, and then we'll go through with the other partners.
Thanks very much. I wanted to ask more about the XRF technology, I think it is. The price you mentioned was one of my questions, which answer my first question of, I'm wondering, are you helping support others to get access to this technology as well, more than just World Vision? Because part of what I was wondering was, from a systems perspective, what happens when you send that material back? Is it that those manufacturers are learning and changing their practices, and do you have evidence of that? Or is it that they're reselling it to a different market and we're just shifting who they're selling it to?
I'll have a first go at that. Mike, you may want to follow up on me, but excellent question. Questions that we're asking ourselves now. This is a work in progress. It's a work in progress. In Ghana, we have one machine, right? Yeah, that's what we have, and we're asking ourselves, how do we get more buy-in on this? We're addressing those questions. I wish I had more details on this, but this is one of the reasons we funded the Ghana Water Quality Study, was to start unpacking these matters. Also, going back to Iyasu's question, that's why we funded the Ghana Water Quality Study, is to try to get a handle on how we, what we need to be doing. Your first question was are we sharing the XRF, and then what was your second question or comment?
do the parts just
Oh,
get
yes.
shifted to another?
Yes, now, we do visit our suppliers, but again, that's a work in progress. We're still trying to figure out what they're doing. We don't know at this point. We don't know, but we do visit with them, and that is certainly on our agenda to try to find out what happens. But an excellent question.
Yeah, this is something else we've talked about, is doing some science around sending students out to go to these manufacturers, see what
Yes.
they're producing, call them out on it, and see whether or not we can start to push reform in the sector that way as well too. But they have to be held accountable, and there's really no reporting on this right now. And where that stuff is ending up, you're exactly right. We have to follow it all the way through, all the way through. On the XRF, I don't think we're envisioning that every field installer has an XRF with them. The idea is, how do you position XRF testing within your supply chain so that you can validate that what you're getting is what you want to get, and whether that's at a port of entry, whether or not that's in your warehouse, wherever that might be. And you can rotate it, right? I mean, one of the proposals we've had for World Vision, for example, is you've got country X, you go to your warehouse, validate that supply chain, send it next month over to the different country, and go ahead and validate that spot, and then move it around. So I realize it's costly, but it is low cost and easy to do. Sorry, there's one other question out here. Mike?
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that I think maybe the biggest thing that World Vision and others are doing to support this is de-risking it for others, sort of showing, hey, we did this, we got the data, we used it to take an action, and it actually was successful, and so you're not going to lose your job if you suggest this in your organization. That said, right, economic barriers still there. What happens to unsold stock? Still a good question. So, glad you raised those, but I think sort of beginning to de-risk preventive actions and raise the cost of selling unsafe parts seem to be things that have good externalities for others.
I'll make it quick. So I know we've been talking about manufacturers and suppliers, but I was wondering in terms of communicating some of these, results to residents. So for example, don't buy from this manufacturer, and maybe look out for like these manufacturers when you're buying your faucets. And is there a good way of doing that without setting off any, major alarms or, kind of panic in the city or in the country? And another very quick question, has there been any financial analysis done, for example, in the case of Ghana? What would it mean to retrofit some of these, water infrastructure to kind of reduce the risk of lead exposure? Thank you.
It's a challenge when a market's totally unregulated, because, let's take, say, for example, any given country, you have a spectrum of products that are available in that market. If you go into the capital city, into the high-end store, that the chances of you buying a quality product are probably fairly high. And if you're going into the open-air market and buying it off a blanket, the product you're buying is probably fairly low quality. And everything else in between is a big question mark. And so, in many of these products wouldn't even have manufacturers necessarily listed on them. And so if it were a matter of just, pointing out who the bad actors are in this sector, and shaming them, that'd be one thing. And you can't even rely on consumers to be able to differentiate between a safe product and an unsafe product. And that's why part of our emphasis is working at the government level and with the manufacturers is just to stop the flow, because consumers don't even have a choice right now. They just have, there's no way for them to tell. So I do think communication is very important, particularly, and I think communications gets in more into like when an issue is found, how we communicate into the populations, and so forth. But that's one of the biggest challenges we see in our end. There's just no way for a consumer to know.
Yeah, and I just want to jump on that part too. I mean, a lot of this might sound like a technical issue, but I really think there's a huge communication issue in here, and how you engage the governments and engage the partners very early in this discussion, because like you said, you don't want to announce something and not have a solution for it by the time you announce it. So you need to be very proactive about your engagement with groups and organizations. And that's a key part of what I think we want to do build this partnership around, is not just the technical skills, but the social skills, and make sure we're rolling it out the right way and getting the type of change that we want. Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate that. You can give them a quick hand. again, I apologize. I have to run out to do with the plenary, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sid, and you're in great hands. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Aaron.
And I'll go.
For the final portion, what we thought we would do is just invite folks who have become partners on the pledge. Many of them are founding partners who launched this at the UN conference in March in 2023. And what the aspiration is, what are the gaps that they hope that the initiative and the partnership can help address. So we have a bunch of people lined up, and because they're all around the room, what I thought we would do is Catherine would walk around with the microphone to them, and you can hear them, a couple of minutes tell you about what they think the pledge and the initiative can be. So first up, we have Dr. Abrampa from the Republic of Ghana.
Thank you very much. And let me say that, yes, and Ghana took the pledge with all the seriousness that also accompanies that. And so right from there, we started the whole action. First, by looking at what do we need to do to really make sure that some of the issues that we've raised in terms of lead contamination could be reduced, and then give our people the comfort of drinking water. So the first level was to look at the persuasion in terms of coming out with the needed policies, the needed regulations, to make sure that we prevent it. So we don't worsen the situation, because that becomes very expensive if we should import all these pipes and pumps before we realize that they're no good, or they are also contaminating our water. We need to deal with that. So regulation and policy is the very first thing. The second thing is the understanding, because we realized that already it was in the public. People got to know that our water that we're drinking is contaminated. So there was a need to really disseminate, yes, and share with people what is the problem and the actions that we've already taken in order to respond to some of these areas. Very, very necessary. The third area is to look at the whole issue of implementation. After regulation, what? It requires that a number of institutions beyond the normal wash institutions must be brought in order to deal with it. The Ghana Standards Authority is very, very primary. The Public Procurement Agency, very, very important to bring in more research institutions, the universities, the research institutions. And not only that, but also to look at the private sector. Those who are already producing some of these pipes locally, those who are fixing these pumps, and those who are also trading in some of these products, to also bring them in to be part of this whole process. And so the president thought it wise just to not stay with the ministry, but to lift it to the National Development Planning Commission, which can then summon a lot of these institutions together to deal with the issue and coordinate the process, so that we know exactly what we are sequencing, the actions complement each other to be able to deal with it. The other point, which is also very important and which we saw, was really the capacity element. To be able to, these institutions and universities, if they are going to undertake and continue with their research, given what World Vision is doing, to what extent are these institutions prepared to do
right.
it. So there was the need to also think about partnering with other institutions that are already doing that, UNC of course, and then also to look at other local institutions that can also do that, like Kumasi Technical University. But not only that, but also look at the middle people, because they deal with all these pumps, and they would be able to identify the brand which is being imported, right, because there are so many areas where these products are brought in. So we also needed to get them into the process to educate them so that they will be able to help with this funding, which is the big situation there. If you look at the number of pumps and pipes already creating a problem in the system, we want to replace all of them. That itself would definitely bloat my budget. And therefore, it's a big consideration that we need to look at what is the best way. Mm-hmm. Okay. So to make sure that the water that is gone out is gone, But that's that which is coming in to make sure that it is clean. And so right from the customs, surveys, as I said, the importation, and this is dealt by different institutions altogether. It's not a wash institution. So we needed to bring them in, the customs and excise, those dealing with the ports where a lot of these products are imported in. We needed to also bring them in to look at that. The other thing is funding research. Ghana is still, we just 0.6% of our GDP spent on research. So how do we continue with this process? Which means that we also need to look around and some institutions that can support us. And let me say that the Hilton Foundation has really given some resources to help in coordinating and supporting and management of this process, both for the National Development Planning Commission and also the ministry, and also working with the utilities already existing. But it is well and good. Good in the sense that the consciousness, people knowing that, look, there's a problem with it, are conscious whatever they are buying to fix in their own private home. Is it the brand that contains the lead? Is it the one that World Vision has indicated that there's a problem with it? And so it is helping people also to make decisions as to how to get a good brand. And this is something we need to also advocate and bring it out to decision makers to know which brands ought to be imported, which brands are tested and certified by the Ghana Standards Authority, and then the new builders, engineers, and others can make that choice. The other thing is also regulatory agencies working. Currently, we have the urban areas are managed by the Ghana Water Company, and the Public Utility Commission is working seriously in the urban area. What about the rural areas? So that is also a challenge, and we need to look at that consciously. So with that, I would say that it's a good process. The partnership must be intensified, and we hope that we can advocate for more countries to join this process so that we can provide safer water for the people of the world. And that will help us to really facilitate the attainment of SDG 6 in earnest. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Dr. Tindi Mugaya from the Ministry of Water and Environment, Uganda.
Thank you very much. Uganda is one of the 3 countries that really are pioneers on the RED pledge. And we did decide to join this for a number of reasons. Number one is access to safe drinking water in Uganda is a fundamental human right. And when we note that RED has serious impact on human health, noted that we need to ensure that actually we address RED before it becomes a very serious problem. The other thing also is that we have a number of water supply systems installed with new and old pipes, but we don't know the quality. We don't know the kind of materials that are contained there. We don't know whether we have lead in there, but also we don't know whether we have lead in water. So we decided to be part of this so that we can, first of all, get baseline information. Is there lead in water? Is there lead in the materials? And what can we do to address this problem? Also noted that this problem cannot be addressed by one country alone. We need partnerships, and that's why we decided to join the other partner countries and also the other organizations so that we can learn from them, we benchmark, and be able to build our capacity. We did note that the challenge we will be having is monitoring. Again, that's where we would want to learn from those who have already moved forward on how do we build our capacity to monitor, how do we ensure that the people that are actually doing the monitoring are doing it right, do we have laboratory services, is the sampling being done right, and I think as has been mentioned. The other thing also is, do we have regulations? We are talking about standards. How do you set standards? But what about regulations? We are at a point right now where we are revising our National Water Policy and Water Act, and we feel that this is the right time actually to come up with specific regulations. So this process, again, we are engaging in with all the other partners, will help us to get specific regulations to address the challenge of lead. And of course, within the regulation, then we'll be able to put in place a mechanism for enforcement, because at the end of the day, if you don't have any enforcement mechanism, then obviously it will continue. But monitoring and enforcement go hand in hand. The other thing also which we felt we need to work on is awareness, so that people can know that lead is the problem. And I think what has been shared here clearly indicates the importance of raising awareness so that we can get support from the communities up to the political level so that as we move forward all together. The other thing, of course, also is to ensure that we continuously create partnerships because, again, we are all trying to achieve SDG targets. So if we are going to achieve SDG targets, that's where we need partnerships. Actually, Uganda, when we were piloting SDG 6 indicators, we worked with the various agencies, we worked with UNICEF, with the WHO and others to help us actually integrate the monitoring framework in our place. So we are seeing this as a logical way of moving forward what we have been doing. And we do hope that with the partnerships we have created and also with the support we are getting from Hilton Foundation, I think we'll be able to move, and next time maybe Uganda will be the one that will be sharing some of the results of the work we have done on the ground. And again, we are working in partnership with many other organizations. We'll be working with the standards body. We are working with our National Planning Authority. That's why we have the chairperson with us. And of course, also have a National Water Quality Laboratory, and my colleague who is in charge of it will be here, is here to also to get to know what we can do. So we look forward to working with you and learning from more of you, especially those that have already moved forward. Thank you very much.
Nabil Chemali, Hilton Foundation.
Yeah, thank you. So very quickly, our contribution to this work is trying to integrate lead testing in the grants that we make because we work on water quality, and this is one additional aspect that we're testing for to establish the baseline, because as we've heard, this is a problem that we know exists, but we don't know the magnitude of this problem, and there are no baselines, especially in rural areas where we work. So we're helping with this. We are also working with partners to support governments in improving regulations and standards for lead testing, because we also heard that this is a very important aspect. The other thing is we're, as much as possible, of course, helping, using our voice and doing advocacy to elevate this problem and address and work with different actors across the supply chain, with manufacturers, with partners, implementing projects, construction companies, and manufacturers to make sure that we reduce the use of parts that increase the risk of lead leaching. And finally, of course, we are joining our voice to others in the community, trying to elevate this issue and work with additional governments to really elevate this problem and hopefully create enough momentum for a UN resolution for the eradication of lead in drinking water systems. Thank you.
If you haven't caught the drift, please join the pledge.
Exactly, and I feel the pressure. I'm between you and the break. So, Dane Hansen with IAPMO. I just want to reiterate the importance of this partnership. It's not very often you see a group of NGOs, governments, partners, manufacturers, industry come together on the same issue to address lead. I do want to emphasize and try to ask everybody here, if you're not joined, try to get your entity, your government, your organization to join this pledge. We do know this is a big problem. We know it is never going to end unless we can do something about it now. And as Christopher mentioned earlier, we are now just seeing the ramifications of this issue in the United States because it was not addressed at an earlier stage. So now you have the opportunity, you're implementing and putting in projects, putting in products, putting in water systems now. And if they have lead in them, then we are going to be dealing with that for the next 50, 75 years. So try to address it now. We're seeing NGOs jump on, making it a requirement in their procurement procedures. So please do what you can to join, make the difference, because you will see a difference immediately and also in generations to come. So thank you.
Behind you. I hope folks can stick around for a few minutes.
I'll keep my comments very short. Just two two points as to why World Vision signed on to this. First of all, World Vision is a child-focused organization. Our work is to assure the well-being of the world's most vulnerable children, and it was a natural step to sign on to this because we care about the well-being of the world's children. Secondly, we realize we can't do it alone. We cannot tackle this problem alone. World Vision can't solve it. We're in the places it works alone. None of us can solve this where it works alone. So any means by which we can begin coming together and tackle this together, we want to support.
Vincent Casey, WaterAid.
Hi, thanks, Sid. I'll be very brief. Just to echo Ray's comments there, I mean, this is a problem that requires collective action and many people coming together to build the evidence base and raise awareness about this problem, which is often invisible, sometimes difficult to detect. So that evidence base is needed to build the political will to really address it. Just in WaterAid, since being part of this group and since signing up to the pledge, we've received a lot of support from Mike and Sid in initiatives that we're working on to try and address the problem. For example, revising our quality program standards to encourage pre-shipment testing of components to ensure that they're lead-free, and also stipulating that lead-containing components shouldn't be used in program work, but also in ongoing projects that we've got going on at the Uganda Water Week. Together with the Ministry of Water and Environment, we launched the phase 2 of the hand pump improvement project there. It's originally intended to deal with corrosion, remove iron, and improve the performance of hand pumps. But after discussions with Sid and Mike, we've also added a lead removal component to that. So pre-testing, pre-shipment testing of components to ensure there's no lead in them. Challenge with brass components still, but switching to stainless steel cylinders is a good option, yeah, there. So thank you very much.
Jennifer Hopenick-Redmond from RTI.
Hello. So at RTI, we are dedicated to solving the world's most critical problems by turning knowledge into practice. That's kind of our slogan. And we have decades of research on environmental contamination of lead in the environment and how it affects public health. We are strongly supportive of getting closer to zero lead exposure. And to do that, we really must have multi-sectoral partnerships across the globe to solve such a long-standing and pervasive problem and share that vision of a lead-free future. Together, we can address the technical, financial, regulatory, political, and other factors that go into why this continues to be a problem since the Roman Empire, and push a wave of lead-free infrastructure, hopefully, and lead-free water at every tap. So that is why we signed the pledge, and that is why we encourage everyone that hasn't yet to do so still. Thank you.
We'll wrap up with the UN agencies, WHO and UNICEF.
Thank you, Ambatsi Majuru with WHO. So I think we're committed to helping countries address some of the main challenges that have been brought forward in this discussion. On regulation, again, we do have the WHO guidelines for drinking water quality that provide guidance on what regulations should state around contaminants, including lead. So we'll be working with countries. We're working to revise or update their regulations to better address lead management, and also committing to continuing these discussions on how other countries have dealt with lead through our platform, International Network of Drinking Water Regulators that WHO coordinates. The other area that has been highlighted already is around capacities for water quality testing. And so that's something that we've already been in discussion with partners, including UNICEF and others that are represented here, on how we can strengthen capacities, not just for testing for lead, but broadly for managing drinking water quality. And so that includes microbial contaminants. And that will be something that we'll be working on in future. Again, on this issue of testing, the issue of filtration devices has been raised. And I thank you, Chris, for highlighting that it's not just about buying a filter and expecting it to work. We do have some precedents already in some of the work that we've been doing in evaluating POU devices for microbial contaminants, and we know already there that it's a wild, wild west. So we'll be committed to working with partners in developing norms, criteria for evaluating these filters to make sure that if you're going to buy a filter to remove lead, it does actually do the job. And again, we're committing to having, participating in more forums such as these, because there's a richness of experience and information that is shared when we all come together as implementers, as UN agencies and practitioners to discuss what is happening and what solutions can work. So thank you.
Okay, I will try to be brief. I would like to echo what Ray mentioned. It's a complex problem that no single organization or government can fix in isolation. That's why being part of the technical working group is so important. There are still uncertainties, yes, but that shouldn't prevent us from working and acting now. And I think there was already a compelling case from developed countries where investments made decades ago make huge challenges to address this problem. There is no one-fits-all solution. I wish we could say this is the maximum, leakage of lead that is admissible, etc. Each country, each context is different, and we need to recognize that. But I would like to end with, I would say, an inspiring story, because this problem could feel overwhelming. I don't see Adeline in the room, but I would like to just share with you one example. It's not from UNICEF, but there is one city in Madagascar where 87% of children had lead in blood exceeding the WHO standards. 87% of children. They did an investigation, of course. There was lead presence in water. They found the source. Locally manufactured hand pumps had lead components. They replaced those lead components for new, for different materials, and they found that quality of water improved. There was quality of water meeting the WHO standards. And what is more promising and important, the percentage of children and the concentration of lead in blood in children reduced significantly to the majority. So we could see how, in that case, a small organization with support from a PhD student at that time, now he's a PhD, and a university professor, was able to fix a problem in one city in Madagascar. So there are, I would say, low-hanging fruits that can, start the process. And I believe that this is like a snowball that is moving, and that we can collectively address this issue. Thank you.
Just to note that you don't have to do this alone, so please join us. And we have all the help and resources and the right people in the room and in the partnership. Thank you so much for coming this morning.